Okay, so welcome to the third in a series of webinars that we hope you will find useful and another way for us all to connect as a community of practice. We've done two now. So the first one we did looked at resilience because we thought that was kind of what we all needed at the time. And then we looked at triage because triage and those short one-off interactions are really the only contact that therapists seem to be having with patients when working in the community. So we looked at how you could embed self-management principles into those interactions to try and help people build confidence at home, patients build confidence at home to self-manage. And one of the things that we talked about last time was around hopes and fears and how it's really important to acknowledge patients' hopes and fears. But actually, what we know is that sometimes a barrier to that or a worry that people can have is that then you open up these conversations, you feel like you need to have answers. And we know from talking to some of you at the end of last week and this week that some of you are struggling with keeping that balance between being flexible and holding kind of space to kind of hold that uncertainty that you're working with, but also offering your team some stability and some sense of forward movement. So I think the next webinar, this one I'm very excited about because we're going to be looking at the Permeable Practitioner. And I'm going to hand over very shortly to Debs and Arnie, who beautifully bring together research and some clinical practice examples. But before we do, I'd really like to know how you are all doing. So if you could open up the chat window and just write one word or two words, three if you really have to, for how you are doing right now, how you're feeling, what's going on for you right now, wherever you are tuning in from. Where's my chat window? I can't see it. There we go. So how's everyone doing? Okay, whilst you're doing that, I will go through the usual process pointers. I can't see the chat window. Can someone else read out some of the words that are coming up for people?
Sure, I'll do it.
That's great.
Okay, right, we've got uncertain, cautious but hopeful, warm, I'll go along with that, contented, so a few happier words this week.
That's good.
Curious, tired, wobbly, and yeah, some people exhausted, but some optimism and busyness. So a bit of a mixture.
That's great. Okay, so a few of the normal process pointers. So just make sure that your mics are muted for now. There will be a chance to have a discussion at the end. We are recording a session, so the good news is that if you've got any friends or colleagues who couldn't make it this evening, they can watch on YouTube at a later date. The bad news is that then you will be captured on the recording if you type or you're in the video. Please do use the chat window. Technical problems, questions as we go through. I'll be managing the chat window whilst Debs and Arnie are talking. Also, last time someone couldn't see the speaker, so just make sure you've got the view. That's in your control. So make sure you've got the person that you want to see in the top corner. It's still quite a new process, so let us know any feedback if you have any, either in the chat window or email us afterwards. A little plug for our Facebook page again, so another place to share ideas in a bit more detail. We've got about a 30-minute presentation and about half an hour for discussion. So we'll be finished about 8:30, and at the end I will be revealing the next topic, which is quite exciting, so stick around for that if you can. If you have to leave early because you've got other stuff going on, that's totally fine, I understand. So, oh no, it's a bit too early. I'm going to stop sharing screen and I'm going to hand over to Debs and Arnie.
Well, thanks, Katie. Hopefully, I'm going to get this sharing coming up on the screen now. Can we see that?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's great.
Oh, it's running very slowly. Right, there we go. So thanks, Katie, and thanks, Bridges, for giving us this opportunity to share some ideas with you this evening. Arnie, should we just say a little bit about ourselves first?
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Right.
Do you want to kick off?
Yeah, so my name's Arnie. I'm a physio, and I provide clinical leadership clinical leadership across 5 different teams. So it's 2 inpatient rehab wards, 2 day hospitals, and a community falls and bone health service. And I work as part of St George's Hospital. And I met Debs many years ago now, and I constantly call her. She's sort of my supervision guru, the person that I call if I'm having any of my own uncertainty and needing help kind of navigating some of the people that I work with and the kind of teams that I'm part of.
Thanks, Arnie. That's so no pressure there. So I'm a speech and language therapist by background, and now have had kind of a strange old career where I've done all sorts of things like being in-service patient manager, and then actually thanks to Fiona Jones was lured into the cognitive spa of the university world in 2008 and have been there ever since. And that's where I started to get interested in supervision. And I'm really fortunate to have lots of contacts like Arnie, who I'm able to compare notes with about supervision and supporting and leading teams in healthcare, because when I'm in danger of falling into some kind of theoretical soup, they always kind of ground me in practice. So hopefully you're going to enjoy sharing some of the ideas that we've got this evening with us. So here are the things we're going to try and do. We're going to talk about the inevitability of uncertainty in practice, and not just as a sort of COVID-19 phenomenon. I think we're experiencing a lot of uncertainty at the moment. I'm going to say that's something that we experience in practice anyway, but we might have lost sight of that. We're going to talk a bit about the sources of our uncertainties. We're going to talk about how we recognise and resolve our uncertainties, the sorts of helpful behaviours and characteristics of what I call in my research a permeable practitioner. So then we're going to talk about being a permeable supervisee, a permeable supervisor and leader, and then we're going to share some practical tips with you. So we've got about 25-30 minutes of talking to do and ideas to share, and then we'd like to hand over to you for comments and maybe challenges. So I started thinking about supervision a number of years ago from a research perspective, much probably to the surprise of, I know I've seen at least one of my previous managers on the screen a few minutes ago who would probably be surprised that I got interested in supervision, but I did. And I started talking to, in the first place, allied health professions about their supervision experiences. But what I noticed was they didn't talk about supervision so much as they talked about wondering how they were doing. How am I doing? Is this what a band 7 physio looks like? Is this what a team leader looks like? Is this what a respiratory physio or a community OT looks like? I started to get very interested in this idea that people were talking about the inevitability of uncertainty. And although that seemed like it was a bit surprising to me because I was hoping they were going to talk about supervision, I started to look at the literature and realised that this is a really long-standing, well-written about idea. So if you go back to the 50s, Renee Fox talked about how important it is for us to include in our education for healthcare professionals, paying attention to the fact that there's an inevitability about uncertainty in clinical practice. And she said we should put that into our training. And Mabon and colleagues, in fact, refer to Florence Nightingale even talking about how uncertainty can have an impact on how we practice, how confident we feel, even how compassionate we are. But I sort of wonder whether, as we've done more and more evidence base in our training and our development as practitioners, we've sort of started to think that feeling certain is the more normal thing, and feeling uncertain is something that's undesirable. So when I spoke to practitioners, initially speaking to allied health professionals, but actually over the last year I've spoken to nurses, doctors, particularly in the advanced clinical practice space, I noticed 4 particular sort of characteristics, or not characteristics, categories of uncertainty. The first one is, do I know enough? And do I know what to do? And then the other one is quite related to that is, am I doing what people expect me to do? Is this what I'm meant to do with this knowledge and this understanding? And then there's another one, which is, do I look like the professional I'm meant to be? Am I recognizable as a surgeon, as a matron, as a speech and language therapist? And then there's the even more inevitable having too much to do, feeling burdened and by practice demands. And I know, Arnie, that's something you and I have talked about a lot, that sense of uncertainty and the different types of uncertainty and how difficult it can be to unpick them. And I know recently you've done some quite interesting things with your team as they were starting to explore the uncertainties that were rolling down the road as COVID rolled in. Do you want to tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, so from sort of, I think it was the middle of March, wasn't it, that COVID happened and government kind of announced various things, and all of our trusts probably said, you know, you've got to stop what you're doing, you've got to increase some services, decrease some services, and provide things differently. And within the teams that I work in, there was a lot of anxiety and a lot of people saying, well, I just has the sense of kind of people feeling unhappy, and there's this, you know, people could tell that change was happening, it was happening very quickly. And I sort of wanted to explore that with people and give them a safe space to be able to talk about how they were feeling and try and unpick it a little bit. So one of the things that I've used previously is these kind of postcards. And so what I did is kind of got the team together, put the postcards all down on the table and said, pick a postcard that represents how you feel at the moment. And people kind of, you know, had a little look, a bit of, you know, some people like wanted 5 and I was like, no, just 1 postcard. And then the stuff that it kind of showed up was really interesting. So one of my colleagues picked up this postcard of a burger, and I said, okay, like, tell me about the burger. And she said, well, it's a burger, but it's been left there. I'm not sure how long it's been left there for. I'm not sure, you know, it was really juicy and delicious at one point, but now I'm not sure it's going to taste so good because it's been left on the side for a while. I'm not really sure if I can reheat the burger and whether it would taste so good anymore. And I'm not even sure if I'm going to want the burger. I might want something completely different. And I said to her, well, tell me more, like, what's the burger? And she said, well, the burger's me, the burger's a service. She's like, the burger's everything. And I was just like, wow, like, that's so much information, so much kind of description. And if I'd asked her, how are you feeling, just as itself, she would never have come up with that sort of like description. And then also people just really shared, they were really open with how they were feeling. So one member of staff picked up a postcard of Ophelia. So this lady kind of lying in the water on her back, looking very peaceful, looking very calm. And one member of the team picked it up and she said, yeah, I was really sick actually a couple of weeks ago. And she goes, I really thought I was going to die. She goes, I was really, really unwell. And she was like, every day when I wake up, she's like, I'm just so grateful. She's like, I'm just so happy that I come to work. I'm just so happy that I'm okay. And I think for the team, it was really good for people to kind of hear where other people were, like what space they were in, to go, oh, okay, I get it. That's why she's so happy. Like, that's why she's not panicking and freaking out, because she's just really happy she's alive. So people shared all sorts of different things about their personal lives. And you're not forcing people to be vulnerable, but they're kind of choosing to share that with each other. And it kind of just created that safe space to kind of start those conversations. Yeah.
It's so interesting, isn't it? Because you and I have talked before about how helpful the postcards are, and how liberating they can be, exactly as you described. It sort of gives, instead of constraining the conversation and maybe garden pathing our colleagues into talking just about the work stuff, it helps us to explore some of the other factors that might be influencing how we're approaching the uncertainties we're feeling in a practice context. And I don't know about you, but I've very rarely, if ever, I'm trying to think of if ever, has there been someone who didn't want to play the postcard game. They sometimes look at you as if you're a bit crazy when you first do it. Yeah. Actually, they really get into it, and it's quite a good leveling. Whatever kind of grade you are, what band you are, what role you have in the team, everyone can play this game.
Yeah, completely. And I think it just gives people the freedom to be more creative as well, use a different kind of part of your brain in a way.
Yeah, we do lots of the same stuff, don't we? It's quite nice to do something different. So some of the things you've described there really match with those different types of uncertainty. And I'm thinking about the burger, kind of, it's very overlapping and sort of ill-defined in places, some sort of almost a bit messy. And that's how our concerns feel to us when we experience them in practice. And I sort of categorize those concerns in 3 ways. So one is platform for practice, which I'm going to come back to in a moment. The other is socio-professional. That's that thing about what sense are others making of me in my role in this practice setting. Whether that's what sense are patients making of me, what sense are my colleagues making of me, what sense am I making of myself? So all that socio-professional stuff. There's the practice demand stuff, which we talked about, you know, the burden and the demands. And then there's this platform for practice. So let me say a little bit more about that, because I think it can be a useful idea for us when we're trying to understand how we go about unpicking the uncertainties that we're experiencing. So for me, what I notice when I talk to practitioners about their practice-based uncertainties is it's not just their knowledge and skills that they are bringing to play when they're dealing with practice events, but it's their experiences, both professional and personal. So things that happen in work and outside of work. And your example really illustrated that nicely with the postcards. And it's also stuff about our personal qualities and attributes. So in combination, it's these things that we use to anticipate what events are going, how we're going to manage events in a practice setting. You know, we get a referral and we look through it and we know what knowledge or skills or experiences and qualities we're going to foreground and background when we go to meet those the practice demands, when we go to see the patient. Sometimes that plays out, those anticipations match. The things that we've decided we'll need at the foreground are the right things. And sometimes they're not. We might get to a bedside and someone's just been given some, you know, devastating news. And instead of the knowledge and skills we thought we were going to bring to that bedside at that moment, we actually bring more of our personal qualities and attributes to the fore initially. So I know when you were talking to your colleagues, you've captured some of the sense of the things that they said, Arnie, and I think we might see some of that platform for practice stuff in here. But do you want to talk us through?
Yeah, so there was a definite kind of feeling of this isn't what I signed up for, that middle quote, people kind of saying, actually, I thought I was joining a team that was going to do this thing, and now we're doing that thing. And people kind of saying, but I'm a physio, I don't do telephone triaging, or I don't do appointments virtually, like I'm a hands-on person. Or there was kind of stuff around, I'm a physio, I can't order equipment. That's not my role. That's not what I'm supposed to do. So like you were saying earlier, Debs, about your kind of identity as well as a professional. Mm-hmm. And also, you know, there was kind of a discrepancy between people being really up for stuff, saying, yep, send me to the Excel, I'll do the training, I'll go, don't worry, I'll leave my family for 3 months, I'm happy to do it. And other people who really struggle with that and, you know, kind of the opposite end of the spectrum. And I suppose for our teams, the teams that I work in, there was this kind of uncertainty about, are we going to be continuing as we are, or continuing in a different way, or are we going to be redeployed to the wards to provide you know, intensive care or kind of COVID treatment to COVID patients on the acute wards. So yeah, there was lots of kind of uncertainty that came up around that, and people, I suppose people's narrative of how they thought their career was going to pan out, mm-hmm. then not being met.
I've been thinking quite a lot about that since you shared these with me, because it's I mean, I think it's an illustration of, you know, if we take the physio example, there's somebody who's not quite sure what they're going to foreground or background in their platform for practice to meet whatever it is you're asking them to do in this new unanticipated space. Mm. I also started to think about, because I think you said the people who were kind of, you know, sign me up for Excel were some of your younger, less experienced colleagues. Is that right? Yeah,
that's right.
So I've been thinking about how almost the richer our platform for practice, the more established it is. Maybe the more we reach for our go-to things in our platform for practice, we forget that there are other things underneath that we have used in the past in other roles, in other jobs, and we become a little bit less confident about bringing them to the fore, probably because the more experienced we get, the more we kind of know there is to know about something. But there's something about that enthusiasm when your platform for practice is perhaps less noisy, less busy, that helps you. I don't know, I was just thinking about it after we shared this slide a few days ago. So the tricky thing then is, how do you unpick that in a way that, because people bring you these messy concerns as a leader or a supervisor. And I know you've used Maslow in the past to unpick these things in a really effective way. Are you happy to talk us through that?
Yeah, so I love using Maslow. Like, I just think it's a really good framework to kind of hang things off. And so what I did with my teams was kind of asking them, you know, kind of talking about their concerns and trying to put it into some sort of structure. So at the bottom, you've got the physiological needs. And actually people were saying, it's really hot and sweaty wearing PPE. Or if I get redeployed, really simple things like, I'm not going to know where the loos are. People talked a lot about sleep. And especially at the beginning, people were saying, I'm really struggling to sleep. I'm waking up, I can't stop checking my phone all the time. I'm, you know, always looking at the news kind of feeds. But also in that bottom section, there's stuff about, I'm working from home, but I don't have a desk space. I'm sitting at my kitchen table and it's really uncomfortable. And actually I'm getting a bit of back pain from this. And then at the beginning, I think when, you know, the supermarket shelves were bare, it was like, okay, well, actually, where am I going to get food from? So those really basic physiological needs were kind of difficult. You know, people find difficulty in that bottom rung. And then around safety needs, people were worried about getting COVID to a certain degree. But what I was hearing more was not about them getting it, but what if I pass it on to one of my patients? What if I pass it on to my my husband who has some sort of health condition? But so it was more the concern about other people. And for our teams who work with older adults, it was then, well, these are the vulnerable people. So actually, if I see them, I'm likely to pass it on to them. And you know, what's going to happen in that situation? And there was also this kind of safety need around, what if I make a mistake? Am I insured to do that? I'm doing something different to normal. I'm really worried. What if I do the wrong thing? What if I don't put the and some people were saying, what if I don't at the beginning? What if I don't put the PPE on right, and then I give someone COVID? Mm-hmm. So those are the kind of levels of concerns about safety. And then the belonging and love needs we talked about, and people were saying, you know, I don't get to go out with my friends anymore. I don't get to go to my local church. I'm not able to join my netball team. And people saying stuff like, you know, when I come to work, you're the only people that I see. You're basically now my family. And, you know, you're the only people I get to have conversations with in real life. Like, everything else is done virtually. And then that kind of esteem needs. So people saying, well, gosh, you know what? I'm the band 6 and I supervise the band 5. So I should know what we're doing. If I don't know what I'm doing, then I'm not very good at my job. There's a lot of kind of feelings around that, but also around what am I achieving? So in this new role, new world, what am I supposed to be doing, and how do I know if I've been any good at it?
That's a nice example of that socio-professional stuff.
Yeah. And then the self-actualization, so being the best possible version of yourself. People just saying, well, I don't even know what I'm supposed to look like. I don't know what the best possible version of myself is. And coming back to that burger image, saying, I don't even know if I want a burger. I don't know if I am the burger anymore. Like, you know, just that real like, oh, well, what is this new world going to look like? And then from that, started looking at, actually, out of those things, what things are, how can we get any actions out of it? Can we have some sort of control at all? And some of the things we can't. And I think part of it was acknowledging, do you know what, some of that stuff we can't change. We can't change whether there's food on supermarket shelves or not. But the things that we could change, we then started to talk about. So talking about, okay, well, if I get redeployed, I really want a proper induction. So being able to then tell people, okay, if you get redeployed, you can ask for that. You can say that's what would be helpful for you. We talked a lot about sleep hygiene, because sleep was a big issue for lots of our team. And people sharing ideas about what they found helpful, about, you know, turning your phone off, about, you know, doing relaxation, all sorts of different things. And then the safety needs, a lot that came out of that was about having training, having opportunities to shadow, having supervision, working with someone who's worked in that area before. But also within the safety needs came a lot around kind of governance and about having structures and systems and processes in place.
Sure.
Which for some teams made them feel just a lot safer by having that structure. And then the loving and belonging and love needs, we kind of talked about you know, what different platforms were people using? Like, who was using Zoom? Who was using House Party? Like, what was working? Who did a pub quiz? How are they interacting with their families and their friends in different ways?
Mm-hmm.
And the kind of creativity behind that. And then the esteem needs was about actually celebrating success. So having conversations with each other to say, yep, that visit went really, really well. Or, you know, the way you created that document was really good, but trying to provide feedback to each other so that we were building on people's esteem.
That's so interesting, because it's very easy to overlook that stuff, isn't it? The things that are working well, those are the things that are quite easy to overlook when the pressure's on and you're having to change at pace. I'm interested, and I'm sure other people listening in are interested as well, when you do this sort of Maslow-inspired stuff with your teams, do you have that pyramid there just for you as a kind of aid memoir to ask questions that help to unpick the uncertainty, or would you have that available for everybody to look at?
Yeah, so I have it available for everyone if I remember to print it off, but having it there so that people can kind of visualize it and also see the different things. So as people are talking, we're then putting them into different areas, but then equally sometimes I start at the bottom and then say, what do you think are your physiological needs, and then work up. It kind of depends what people are coming out with.
Yeah, it's interesting because something like Maslow, I mean, if from an academic perspective, often these sorts of the hierarchical sort of design of this can get a bit of bad press, I suppose. But I think what's nice is when you find and what I tend to find is, don't be too hung up on the theory that sits behind these things. If you find it is a mechanism that helps you to unlock some of those conversations and to give them some framework and some kind of skeleton to hang the things on, hang the concerns on, and then use it. I don't think we should get too precious. You know, theory is only as useful as it is to you in a given situation.
Yeah, I think the other thing to say there, Debs, is that I never know what people are going to say.
Yeah.
So I'm not sort of I can think what I would say or what I think they might say, but actually what they say is sometimes completely different to what I thought.
Right. Interesting.
Quite good to then have that structure to then plug it into different levels.
So it stops you almost constraining the conversation with your assumptions.
Yeah. Yeah.
Nice. I was struck when you were talking through that that slide about Maslow, about how people were concerned about making a mistake, what their fears were. And I picked that up loads in the research when I was talking to AHPs, physios, OT, speech and language therapists predominantly. And that sort of cultural thing that's happened for us in probably across sectors, certainly in the public sector and definitely in health, where we've started to think about uncertainty as a marker for risk. And we've sort of lost touch with the fact that it's maybe a prompt for learning. And that's not my idea, and it's not a new idea. Pragmatist Dewey talked about that. He kind of, I'm paraphrasing, but essentially said, without the leap, there's no landing. And more recently, Webster Wright, doing research in healthcare, said that when our learning is linked to, or when it's prompted by something that's created an uncertainty for us, that's when we have really authentic learning that's relevant and meaningful for us. So that brings me on to these helpful behaviours and characteristics that I noticed with my research participants. And these helpful behaviours and characteristics that I would describe as the traits of someone who is a permeable practitioner. So let me say a little bit more about that, because it won't necessarily be a familiar idea to everybody. So permeable practitioners have this cluster of behaviours and characteristics, the first of which is self-awareness. So they're kind of aware that there are going to be uncertainties. They might not overtly articulate that in their heads, but they're kind of looking out for them and they notice them. And they're also, as Arnie's demonstrating, they're aware of and for others. That in itself is not enough, because if Arnie's my supervisor and I'm aware of some concerns I've got in practice, if I'm aware, for example, that say I think I'm not splinting upper limbs very effectively, obviously I wouldn't, because I'm a speech and language therapist, but imagine that you know, that's my concern. If I keep that to myself, I'm not going to resolve it. So you have to be awareness sharing. And ultimately I might share my awareness about splinting concerns with Arnie as my supervisor. But if I'm then not willing to have some feedback about that, again, I'm going to run into a kind of a brick wall about resolving my uncertainties. So I have to be feedback seeking or have a feedback seeking orientation. I've got to be open to alternatives, that there might be more than one way to do things, and also critically aware. So I mustn't be just seduced by the next great idea I hear, or the next piece of research I think sounds promising, and go and implement that without some critical awareness or critical agency. And not just for research. Arnie might suggest some ways in which I might do relaxation, and I might think that's not going to work for me because of this, this and this. So critical awareness or critical agency, but ultimately a willingness to change. So this learning disposition, and it's this cluster of behaviours and characteristics. And I do think their behaviours and characteristics are not a kind of personality type, because I think they're things we can pay attention to, and we can kind of perfect them, not perfect them, but we can kind of enhance them for our benefit when we're trying to deal with uncertainties. So throughout careers, I noticed that permeable practitioners expect, notice, and seek to resolve their uncertainties. They're basically finding the learning potential in uncertainty. And they're importantly recognizing that learning, if we put learning after the uncertainty, we can reduce risk. So there is that relationship between uncertainty and risk. But if we put learning in there, we've got a better chance of managing the risk. So if we go back to your thoughts from your team, we might sort of think about your practitioner who says, I don't do equipment. That feels a little bit impermeable, perhaps. They've got quite sort of fixed view about what their role is. Whereas your people who want to run off to Excel are perhaps down the more permeable end of the spectrum. I don't know if there's anything you want to say about that in terms of observations.
Yeah, I think that's true. And I think it also depends on how people are in the moment, how people are feeling. And I suppose as things calmed down a bit more, as we kind of got into the flow and maybe accepted what was happening, people were then able to role blur a little bit more, because they were able to foregrounder and backgrounder more easily, rather than in their initial response of anxiety and this isn't what I want. I suppose they're able to kind of get over that at some point.
Yeah.
To then be able to be more permeable.
Without putting you on the spot, I know on another occasion we were talking, and you were talking about your own awareness sort of subsequently, when you reflected back that at the beginning of the outbreak, when you were kind of being asked to do things as a team leader, that you noticed your own impermeability.
Oh yeah, completely. Yeah, it was terrible. So I suppose at the beginning of the outbreak, there were lots of things happening, obviously in the world, but also in my world, in terms of my husband's an IT consultant, so him having to work extra hours, the potential of him being redeployed to the Excel Centre with 4,000 or however many thousands of patients, ITU patients that were going to go there, and my fear around what's going to happen to him, what's going to happen to his health, what's going to happen to me, what's going to happen to the kids. And then with the team, I was like, why won't you just do what you're told? Really impermeable, really like frustrated, really just like, I don't get it, it's a pandemic, do you not understand? Like, you need to just do it. And then I think once I then was able to kind of reflect and kind of have some self-care and look after myself a lot better, I was then able to actually be a bit more permeable and be able to it sounds awful, but just interact with people normally, rather than just feeling. And I suppose at the beginning I felt really angry, if I'm honest.
Yeah.
I felt other things that other people were saying about, I don't want to do this job, and I was thinking, no, I don't want to do this job either.
Yeah. Well, I think what you're illustrating there is this thing that I've noticed, which is a bit of a spectrum of permeability. And I imagine people listening in will be able to think of some people in their own experiences, in their own teams or their own histories, who were a bit impermeable, people who said, I've always done it this way, this is the way I'm always going to do it, this is what works for me. They're not kind of very open to learning, and they hold on to particular ways of doing things, but that actually makes them quite vulnerable and fragile as a result, but they're kind of feedback avoidant as well. And at the other end, we've got some quite porous people, the people who want to go on yet another course and for you to do yet another joint session with them, and they're kind of never really they're kind of constantly looking for more reassurance and very highly support seeking. There's kind of an optimum place in the middle, but we kind of oscillate back and forwards all the time anyway. We might have an impermeable day when we think, no, I'm going to stick to my guns today, and it's important that I do. And again, I think this is why I think these are behaviours and characteristics and not personality traits. So just a few more things to share with you before we open the floor up. So I describe these permeable practitioners as seeking to resolve their uncertainties in 3 kind of key ways. The first thing is we check with other people, whether it's our supervisor or colleagues or whatever. And sometimes we're just going to assure ourselves that what we're doing is okay. I just want Arnie to check with me that the way I'm doing my sprinting is okay. And she says, yeah, that's how I would have done it as well. So we're all good. So we're only adjusting if necessary. And I call this practice recalibration because it's a bit like we do with scientific instruments. We check them. If they don't need altering, we don't do anything about it, and we carry on using them and trusting them. I think that, that's where that idea comes from. There are a variety of ways that permeable practitioners seek to resolve their uncertainties. So it might just be ad hoc discussions with colleagues. They might consult a textbook. They might go and find the latest research. They might decide to go on a course. Increasingly in recent weeks, we've used different kinds of social media, professional and otherwise. And one of the other places that we do seek to resolve our uncertainties is through supervision. And we do that when there are certain favourable conditions in place, like a focus on us as the supervisee. There's trust, there's negotiated practice, there's partnership, dialogue, equity, etc. And although I noticed these with the people I did research with, these are ideas that have been written about widely in the literature. So a couple of papers there for you to go to, and particularly that bottom one, the Rothwell paper is a recent review of literature and is freely available through the HCPC website. So you might want to go and find that one later. So I suggest that we use supervision in 2 ways. One is for sanctuary. It's a safe place to share practice demands. Share some of our practice burden and concerns. Sometimes that's enough. Sometimes we just need people to know what we're carrying around and that we're not holding that to ourselves. But other times we also talk about our practice in a safe and trusted place. And that's what I would call meta practice. It's a practice about practice. Permeable supervisees, importantly, don't expect their supervisors to have all the answers. And they recognise that good practice comes in many forms, and they're willing to experiment with alternatives. Permeable supervisors recognise that their colleagues and students don't always do stuff that makes sense to them. But importantly, the permeable supervisor thinks it might have made sense to that individual, and they're interested in what that sense making was. So they kind of recognise it's unlikely that our students and colleagues got out of bed in the morning determined to wind us up. And importantly, they're recognizing that supervising is not about the supervisor creating a mini-me. Permeable supervisors then recognize that we do things in different ways. They encourage some experiments, but they judge when to step in before things get out of hand. They recognize supervision as a place for assuring and consolidating, not always about adjusting, working out which uncertainties can be tolerated. And they recognise it's a place for signposting somewhere else, professionally, personally, and psychologically. So this is not about supervision being some kind of substitution for counselling. I think we sometimes try to push too much under the supervision umbrella. And importantly, and Arnie mentioned this earlier as well, they recognise supervision as a place to celebrate success, not just when there are obvious uncertainties. So how can we build on the things that are going well, that are good, and how can we have more of them? Importantly, permeable supervisors and supervisees focus on resolving the practice concern, as opposed to passing judgment on one another. The supervisor has a duty of care to the supervisee. Both supervisor and supervisee have a duty of care to patients. They care about and care to resolve the uncertainty, and they care about professional and public safety. So supervision in this context is about practitioner well-being, professional development, and governance. Arnie, good point, good moment for a few top tips from you.
Okay, so I suppose I need to begin by saying that I am not an expert in this area. I'm just someone who's kind of giving things a go. But my first top tip would be about self-care. And this week is Mental Health Awareness Week, as you probably have all heard. But I think self-care is really, really important, because actually, if you don't take the time to look after yourself, it's really hard to look after or to facilitate a conversation with other people, be that your patients, but also on your staff as well. So I think self-care is really important, and I often use Maslow as a kind of baseline kind of check. So if I'm having a bit of a wobble, I think, okay, have I had lunch? Do I need a drink? And try at the bottom and work your way up. My next top tip, I suppose, is to find a friend. So find someone that you trust, someone that you can kind of bounce ideas off with. I use Debs, but I've also got other people at work and also outside of work that I can kind of run things by and kind of say, I'm thinking about doing this. Do you think that's okay? And I trust them enough, and we're close enough for them to say, nah, Arnie, don't do it, or yeah, go for it. So have a kind of a friend to help support you. I'd say you need to be prepared to feel uncomfortable and show vulnerability. So sometimes that means not knowing what other people are going to come out with and being able to sit with that discomfort. And sometimes it means people, and I've had examples of people telling me things that I've taken personally, and it's been hard to hear, but actually part of being permeable is being able to do that and reflect on it, and then change your behaviour if needed. I think the fourth point is you need to take a leap of faith. So actually sometimes you just need to jump in and you've just got to do it. And like when I started using kind of these kind of different techniques and different tools, it was really scary, because I was like, I'm not really sure what I'm doing and if it's going to work. But actually once you do it for the first time, it then gets easier. And now my team know, oh, Arnie's doing a session and she's probably got the postcards, and so they then predict that that's what's going to happen, and then they're kind of used to it. But you need to take that initial leap and that initial jump, otherwise nothing happens. And there was a quote, and I can't remember exactly what it was, but it was something about, like, if you're not making mistakes, then you're not learning and you're not developing. And so that leap of faith is really important. And then also accepting that you can't please everyone, and accepting where your responsibility is and where your responsibility stops, and having those sorts of clear boundaries in your own head. But also because otherwise, if you feel responsible for everybody and everything, as I've learned, it just doesn't work. Like, you just can't. It just, you need to accept that other people have their own minds and their own choices and their own decisions that they're making.
Sure. Okay, so people were asked to think about their own concern before today or before this evening. And so maybe you're thinking now, what could help you unpick that? Might you go and get some postcards out, or use something like Maslow, or explore some other ways of looking at your concern? What categories might you notice? Who have you shared it with? Who could you share it with? How willing are you to hear some feedback? Be honest with yourself. Do you need some assurance, or do you also need to make some adjustments? And are there some alternatives that you could experiment with? There's a slide here with the stuff for the bookworms, and now it's over to you.
Thank you so much. That was really good. We've not got loads of time, but we've got some really good questions that came up as you were talking. So first of all, quite a practical one from Claire, who was wondering, Arnie, how do you instigate the postcard thing? Like, it sounds really cool, but what do you actually do in what kind of meeting?
So I suppose I've done it in different ways. So I kind of in team meetings, or I say we're going to have a meeting. I mean, kind of a pause point maybe, or I kind of say we're going to have a meeting just to kind of find out how people are doing. And then I literally just tip out the box of postcards on the table and spread them out, and just say, okay, everyone pick a postcard for how you're feeling, or whatever. I mean, you can use postcards for lots of different types of things. But yeah, that's what I tend to do. And then people pick a postcard, sit down when they've got it, and then I say to people, all right, who wants to talk about that postcard? Who wants to go first?
And how long does it take, roughly? Obviously, depends how many people you've got.
Yeah, and it depends how much each person talks.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
I would say a top tip there is to, if you're short of time, is to say is to actually set that at the beginning. Say, look, we've got 10 minutes. Let's do this. This is how long we've got to do it. So I think it's, be flexible about how you use it.
Okay. The next really interesting question I thought was from two people, so from Jill and from another Claire, they found in their teams that there's a real divide between some people in the team who are very permeable and deal with stuff that's unplanned and are very flexible, and others who aren't. How do you deal with that?
Yeah, I think that is a challenge, and actually the one end of the spectrum can really wind up the other end of the spectrum. I think that, well, I'd be interested to hear what Arnie says, but in my experience, the postcard stuff, or having some kind of third party thing, because people are talking about the postcards, not about one another, using those to explore the different components of the uncertainties can help people to develop some more insight into the people at different parts of the spectrum and why they might be there. You might be able to then say, well, how can we learn a little bit more from this person about this aspect, or how could we you know, that kind of getting some peer learning going by using the postcards as a sort of neutral way of bringing some of that stuff to the fore. What do you think, Arnie?
Yeah, I think absolutely. The postcards just helps to raise other people's awareness of how other people are feeling. But also one of the themes that came out in one group that I did this with was lots of people feeling quite angry. And we actually had a conversation about it, and I said, well, you know, part of this is actually having some self-empathy and being able to acknowledge that what you're going through is really difficult. And I think people found that really helpful to then go, oh yeah, actually I am really struggling and it is difficult, and it's okay that I find it difficult. Yeah, but I suppose you're right, it's about increasing each other's awareness of it. But sometimes with Maslow, the actions that come out of it won't be the same for everyone. But then you're going to have some actions that the less permeable people want to take, and it's okay for them to do those things, and the more permeable people to take a lead on other things and for them to run with that.
I think another thing is that you don't just do group stuff. Yeah. So if you've picked up stuff in a group setting where you've got people at odds with one another, there are opportunities then to use that in your one-to-one time with them to explore their sense making a little bit more about it. What might the impact, you know, what sense do you think so and so is making of where you are with COVID at the minute, or where you are with the redeployment? So you're not just doing it in a group scenario.
No, not at all. And I mentioned to some people earlier, like I had a phone call with someone, and it was a really in-depth conversation where I was able to unpick a lot of things with them, and a lot of stuff came out that she hadn't told anyone else, but then helped me to understand, I think helped her to understand why she was struggling so much with the kind of, I mean, she would describe it as impermeability, but she wasn't sure what her job was, but actually being able to unpick it a little bit, she was able to do it. I often
think as well, I suppose it's around the Maslow thing again, but often talking to people, and this is where the platform for practice thing can be really helpful, because everyone is bringing something to the table. And so thinking about a scenario where someone was very skillful practitioner, but their behaviours were really unsettling the team and creating quite a lot of tension in the team. And using the platform for practice idea and saying, you know, we all respect you as a practitioner, as, you know, no one has more knowledge about your area of practice than you do. But actually, my duty of care to you as a supervisor is to let you know that some of the team are feeling a bit uncomfortable with some of the things that are going on at the moment, and here are some examples. So I know you want to be the best practitioner you can be because your skills are so great, you want to use them optimally. How can we work on some of this other stuff to give you an opportunity to, you know, for people to really respect and enjoy working with you and making the most of your knowledge? So it gave us, instead of it being a judgment about this individual, it was more about what they were foregrounding and backgrounding from their platform for practice. And I think that can be quite helpful, because I think sometimes those supervision sessions can feel a little bit one person passing judgment on another. That whole mini-me scenario. Mm-hmm. You know, you've got to be a practitioner like me.
So another question, again, I suppose directed a bit more towards Arnie, but has it ever gone a bit wrong? Have you ever, because I think you've got to have quite a bit of courage to have some of these conversations, and it mirrors what we were talking about last time around talking to patients about hopes and fears, which is not easy. You worry that you're going to open some big can of worms and you're not skilled to deal with it. So have you ever had it go a bit wrong?
No, I don't think so. I've had people say some quite like random things that I've kind of just been a bit surprised by, but I've never had it where it's been negative, like they've responded negatively towards it. And it's never been that people, you've opened a can of worms. I think that's always the fear. Well, I don't think other people have that fear, but if I start to talk to people about their hopes and fears and how they feel, what if a whole load of stuff comes out and I don't know how to deal with it? But that hasn't happened.
I would say that's about the point I made about recognising what we're doing in supervision and in leadership, and that it's not the same as psychological support. And I think what we don't do often enough is check in with one another about what we think we're doing in that supervision, or that, whether it's peer, whether it's group or one-to-one. We don't often enough set and recheck what we think the ground rules are. And I think we have to be upfront about the fact that supervision has an envelope, and there might be some things that come to the fore that are outside the scope of supervision, and then that's where you would connect with somebody else, or you would use someone with a different set of skills, whether it's counselling or some kind of debriefing or whatever. So I think we've become a little bit almost become unintentionally a bit arrogant about what we think we can do in supervision. We just cram so much into it.
So another one, so I think we were kind of talking about this before we actually came online, but Sophie was asking about or was saying that sometimes she feels permeable in some roles and impermeable in other roles, and it links into some of the things that other people were saying around how do you get that process happening. Like, are there any tools? I mean, you've talked through lots of tools and tips and Maslow's hierarchy, but are there any other things or anything that you have to say around that difference between why some people are permeable in some situations and not in others?
Well, I think that goes back to this platform for practice thing, because it's back to the so it's about us being in tune with our personal preferences and characteristics. We all, well, Fiona Jones is obviously on this call. She knows she practically had to drag me kicking and screaming into ICU back in the day when I just felt totally at sea in that space, and it was not where I felt comfortable practicing, and I would, that's not where I chose to take my career. Actually, we're in a really interesting space at the moment where people have found themselves in clinical contexts which are really at odds with their personal preferences and characteristics. So there's something about acknowledging that we're not all knitted the same way. That's not because you've got the knitting behind you, but we're not all knitted the same way, and there will be places where our fit is better, and that's okay.
That's brilliant. We've got about 4 or 5 minutes left. There are a couple of people that mentioned things, but I wasn't quite sure what you meant. So if I could invite, so Kerry, you were asking about key phrases. Kerry, do you want to unmute your mic and explain what you meant a bit more?
Sometimes I think you can be in situations where you can't necessarily think of the words that you want to say, and instead of so I know that we do this normally, like with our everyday stuff, but just some key phrases that are sort of remain neutral, they're not offensive, that you could easily bring to your conversation, that opens the conversation up without that person feeling offended by the way that you've asked things, but also you're getting what you want from that conversation, and you're not just like fumbling along and trying to sort of pick something up where you should actually just be being constructive with the time that you've got with the individual, and making it work for the pair of you, basically.
I agree with that, Kerry. I think that's a really good observation. I think having some really well rehearsed go-to phrases up your sleeve is a I was going to say get out of jail card, but I think it is a you know what I mean. I think it's really useful to have those, because when you're frantically thinking about how this is not playing out as I thought it was going to have those go-to phrases can give you a little bit of a starting point. Yeah, good observation.
And then a couple of people were asking if you've got any ideas for how you would do this virtually. So there are some teams that aren't actually in the same physical space. I suppose can I open this up to the wider group, because we're all kind of experimenting, I think, at the moment. So I don't know, either if Debs or Arnie, you've got specific ideas, or if anyone else has tried doing something like this.
I've got I was on a course today, and I didn't know you could do this, but in Zoom you can go into
breakout rooms.
No, breakout rooms. Like what?
Yeah, we were playing with that yesterday.
So
They're cool, aren't they?
I don't know how you do it, so I'm sorry I can't help if you're playing with it maybe, but that was really interesting to break up, and we had different exercises and tasks that we could do.
It's so much easier than I thought it was going to be. You just have to select it on the menu in your admin thing. You go down settings, select breakout rooms, and then whoever's the host or co-host, you just create however many rooms, and you can either allocate people or it'll do it randomly, which is quite handy. But it's cool, isn't it?
Can I just say something about the postcard thing, because that would feel like a really difficult thing to do virtually. But there are some great resources, and NHS Education Scotland has a set of downloadable images. I can send you the link for that, and you could pass it on to people.
Yeah, we'll send that.
So if they're not as, I would say they're probably not as rich as using a set of postcards that you've had the joy of collecting over the years, and I cannot recommend to anybody highly enough, start collecting postcards now. It's such a source of joy. But if you could have everybody that you're working with has downloaded the same set of pictures, and then you're all familiar with them, and they could tell you which one they've picked, for example, because I can see it would make Zoom fall over, I imagine, if we put 100 postcards up on the screen. That's a practical idea.
There was some chat earlier on. You can use things like whiteboards or Google Jamboard, put pictures on. It's probably a bit laborious, but
things like the blob men. I don't know if people have seen those blob trees and things like that. They're, those are things that you could use in a virtual way if you were sort of doing this sort of thing for supervision. Maybe not quite so many people in group supervision as this.
I have to say this is great, because I'm actually going to do this with my staff that are working from home in a couple of weeks' time. So that's really good to hear.
We've only got 2 minutes left, and I just wanted to share with you all what we've got coming up in 2 weeks' time. And also, if I can ask you to start thinking about what you would like to do after that. So in 2 weeks, I'm very excited because Fiona and Evie are putting together something kind of in response to the latest guidance from the British Psychological Society around the kind of psychological impact of COVID, and also surviving critical illness and ITU. So we've got a mixture of patient stories, some of the emerging evidence, and also, of course, thinking about self-management support and how that's relevant. But what we'd also really like to know, and please email us or go onto our Facebook page or put it in the chat window, but what's the gap for you at the moment? What's the kind of bee in your bonnet? What are the challenges that are lingering for you in your clinical practice? We're going to continue doing these for as long as they are useful whilst we're going through this situation, every 2 weeks. So let us know. And then
I just to say quickly that when we very first started, there was a great comment from somebody when we asked people how they were feeling, and one of the things that somebody said, I tried to scribble it down because there's been so much chatting. I think this has been the most chatty webinar we've done. Actually, it's about we're waiting for the impact on the community, and we are worried about. And we're worried about the anticipation of what's coming our way. And we hear lots of different metaphors used in this regard. And I think that's what's really been behind putting together this next webinar, is hearing these concerns that the rehab community has about structurally how we're going to cope with it all. So that's what's behind some of the thinking behind this webinar. So hopefully we'll be able to answer some of those, or at least explore some of those issues in 2 weeks' time.
Also, just to give you a heads up that the numbers are growing and we're not going to go past 100. So do email us to book your place beforehand. And if you can't come, let us know that you can't come, then we can reallocate your slot. And also, you don't automatically get registered for the next one if you've attended this one, so you do need to email us ahead of time. Was there anything else that anyone wanted to add before we sign off? Just a massive thank you to Debs and Arnie for an amazing talk. I just thought it was brilliant, and we got loads of lovely comments as we went through, so thank you very much.
Yes, thanks for inviting us.
Yeah, thank you.